welcome to Grade 1 of the Mid Cornwall School of Jewellery Silver Metal Clay Diploma. My name's Lisa Kane, and on this DVD I'm going to be taking you through step-by-step guidance in making 7 different projects. We've chosen these projects to give you a wide range of skills, and you're going to get to try both art clay and PMC. I really recommend that you watch the other DVD first, the Basic Skills DVD. And also in your box you'll find a criteria sheet so you can see the kind of standards that we're going to be looking for in order to be able to pass your work. And don't forget, you can get help from our network of support centres. So take a look at our website to find your nearest support centre. So let's get started on making your projects. So this is an overview of all the pieces you're going to be making, and in your box you'll find a sheet that has the assessment criteria that we're going to be looking for in order to be able to pass your pieces. So for the earrings, it's things like they need to match, they need to be a matching bookend pair. The hooks need to have a smooth, blunt end to them so they're not sharp when they're going through your ear. The arch on the earring hooks needs to be wide enough for your earlobe to fit through comfortably. The front, back and edges of all of your pieces should be well finished. When it comes to the stone setting project, there should be no signs of any paste or slip or clay on your actual stone, which could be fired on there. And the stone needs to be held securely by the shrinkage of the clay. And the bail needs to be in the top third and well secured. This pendant is the one you're going to use your found texture on and your syringe. So the syringe needs to be well attached and the bail needs to hang straight. Your shell charm needs to have a good impression from the mould and has to have a good back on it, so you can either texture it with the shell again or have some other texture on the back. And the jump ring needs to be well closed with no marks from the pliers. We'll also need to see the mould that you made your shell charm from, so don't forget to include that along with all your pieces for assessment. Your leaf bead needs to have a good clear impression of the leaf texture on it and even holes at each end. The cork clay bead needs to have well attached donuts and no signs of your join and an overall texture. So that's a brief run through of some of the assessment criteria, but do make sure you check your assessment sheet carefully that's included in your box. When you've completed all of your projects, this is what you'll have, and these are the pieces that need to be torch fired so that you get the practice at using your torch. So it's your pair of PMC Plus earrings and your stone set pendant. These are the pieces that must be kiln fired. Okay, don't try to torch fire the piece with the cork clay inside it, and make sure that your PMC original pieces get fired in the kiln at 900 for 2 hours. These pieces, you've got some choices. If you've got access to a kiln, then all of these pieces could go in the kiln. If you haven't and you need to minimise how many pieces you put in the kiln, these pieces here could also be torch fired. So you could torch fire or kiln fire these pieces. For this project we're going to be using PMC Plus to make a textured pair of earrings, and after we've fired and polished them we're going to make our sterling silver earring hooks. I'm going to be using an oval cutter and a very small hole cutter here which we've supplied, and if you ever lose this or have trouble finding one, these are actually Q-tips, cotton buds, that have had the ends cut off, so you can always replace these. I'm going to be using some wallpaper texture to texture the surface of my earrings, and I'm going to roll out my clay on top of my leather so that the back of the earring gets a consistent, even finish too. So I'm going to put a little bit of oil onto the surface of my leather to stop the clay from sticking to the back, And you've got about 6 grams here to make your earrings, which should be plenty. So I'm going to start rolling out my clay, and I'm starting with my 10 cards thick and making sure they're on top of my leather, and this way I can roll out my clay and go longer or wider if I need to by taking away the cards and moving my clay. So I've got one more. Now we'll be down to 4 cards thick. And I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil onto the surface of my clay to stop it from sticking to the wallpaper. I'm going to put my wallpaper down on top of my clay and make sure that my cards are beside the texture there but still on top of the leather. I'm going to start in the middle here and roll up firmly. I'm going to come back to the middle and roll down firmly. And that will give us a nice clear imprint of the texture. So now I'm going to cut my shape. A little bit of oil on my cutter, and I'm going to make sure that the texture is running the same way each time I cut my earring, so that I get a matching pair. Little twist to let go of the edges, and I'm going to peel away the excess and get it wrapped up so that it's not drying out. Now I'm going to use my hole cutter to make a hole in the same place on both earrings so that I get a matching pair. Little twist to let go of the edges. I'm flipping it over so that I can use the end that has no clay in it, and I can poke out the excess and put it back into my clay when I get finished. So there we have a matching pair of textured earrings, and once these are dry we're going to attend to the edges, check the back to make sure the texture is consistent, refine the holes, and then we'll be torch firing them and polishing them. So this time we're going to make exactly the same pair of earrings that we've just made, but this time we're going to use the PMC Original, which will shrink by much more. And you'll get a feel for the different types of clay and how they react and how they feel. It's a lot more pliable. We still need a little bit of oil on everything. And again, it shouldn't take more than sort of 4 or 5 grams of clay to complete your pair of earrings. And we're doing the same size, shape and holes exactly that we did last time. And just like we did before, we're going to put these aside and let them dry, and they'll slide off quite nicely, and we can refine the edges and the holes if we need to. It'll be a very small amount of refining needed, and you'll notice the difference in handling the 2 clays when they're dried too. So this is the PMC Original pair of earrings, and I'm going to keep these separate to the other pair because these need to be fired differently. Don't get them mixed up, okay, because the PMC Plus pair of earrings that we made very first of all, they're going to be torch fired. These that are made from the PMC Original cannot be torch fired. They must be fired in the kiln, okay? Remember when you're making your earrings to keep the 2 different types of clay very separate. This clay can be torch fired and this can't. This has to be fired in the kiln. So you really don't want to get them mixed up, especially as you're making the same pair twice, so that you can really see the shrinkage at the end of it. So find whatever way you can at home to keep them very separate. Make them on a separate day, fire these first and then make these so you know what you've got, or keep them in a separate area. And I tend to put mine on a piece of paper or a card or something so that I know what I've got. If you do get them mixed up and you're not quite sure, you should be able to feel the difference between the 2. For a start, if you've made identical pairs of earrings and these are all dry now, they will shrink, okay? So this was the original cutter. They shrink a little bit in the drying stage as well as the firing, okay? So this is the PMC Plus pair because it hasn't shrunk quite as much as the original cutter. and this is the PMC Original, which does a lot more shrinking. And you can also feel the difference between the two. The PMC Original feels much lighter. It's not as dense in silver particles, and it's got a, when you come to sand it, it's got a slightly grittier feel to it. The particles aren't quite as fine as these particles here. So hopefully you'll be able to keep them separate, because if you torch fire these by accident, they will not be a strong pair of earrings. So I'm going to go ahead and refine these ready for firing. We cut them out originally, and I've checked the backs to make sure there aren't any card scooches or dinks or anything that isn't as it should be. So I'm ready to go ahead and refine the edges of these. So when it comes to sanding, make sure you've got your dust mask on. So it really doesn't take an awful lot to clean up work that was well cut in the first place. And remember, don't be tempted to blow on your work, because you'll get a little bit of moisture on there. So the hole again needs a little bit of attention. So I'm just going to get in there. I'm not pushing very hard, I don't want to snap the piece. And it's very mildly abrasive. This is a lot gentler than using something like a needle file. And I need to compare the two holes, make sure they're in roughly the same place and that they're the same size. This one's slightly smaller. Okay, so that's all it takes. So those are now ready, and I'm going to keep those separate. So now I'm going to scoop up all my dust. There's not an awful lot there, but it's all worth saving. It can all be recycled, and I'm going to put it in my little slip pot. And now I'm going to do exactly the same to my PMC Original earrings and keep those separate because these have to go in the kiln. When I've finished refining my PMC Original earrings, I'm going to be very careful to keep the dust separate and put it in the correct slip pot. Now we're ready to do our torch firing, and we're going to fire our PMC Plus earrings. And we've ensured that they're completely dried out, and we've attended to the edges, and we've checked the back and the holes and just made sure that they're perfectly as we want them before we fire them. We're going to concentrate on one at a time. So I'm going to put the other one aside, and I've got my tweezers here ready to manoeuvre anything that's going to be hot, and I've got my safety goggles which I'm going to put on. Anytime you're doing any firing, you must protect your eyes. We're also going to need some method to time the length of the firing that we're doing when we're heating up our silver clay. So any kind of automatic timer or an egg timer will do. And for the PMC Plus, we're going to be firing for a minimum of 3 minutes, but ideally 10 minutes. One of the most important aspects of firing is to do it in a slightly darkened room. And the reason for this is that we need to be able to see how hot the piece is getting. And in a well-lit room, we won't be able to tell how hot the metal is when we're firing it. So I'm going to turn the lights down now. I'm going to focus on one earring at a time. I'm going to get my torch lit. So I'm going to click, put the safety valve on, and I'm going to turn it down very slightly. And you'll notice I haven't got a very pointy flame or an extremely bushy flame. This is about right. I'm going to start to fire my piece, which is thoroughly dried, and you'll see the binder burn away quite early on. This is the binder catching fire now. And we need to heat beyond that point to the point where it starts to glow. The metal starts to glow an orange. Can you see this pinky orange glow? That's the colour that we're looking for. And at that point I'm going to start my timer. And I'm moving the flame very slowly and gently to make sure the whole thing gets evenly hot. And I need to maintain this consistent temperature for a minimum of 3 minutes. Ideally we want 10 minutes per piece. And it needs to be 10 consecutive minutes. You know, if the phone rings and you go off to answer it and you've already done a couple of minutes, come back and start again. Really, the strongest firing comes from time and temperature. Now we need to make sure we don't overheat the piece. If you get the piece too hot and it starts to shimmer on the surface, you're in danger of melting it. So this pinky orange glow is where we want to remain. So I can turn my torch off now. So now we've completed firing, and you can see the difference in the size between the two earrings here. This one hasn't been fired yet and this one has. And we're going to repeat the process, do exactly the same thing again on the second earring. In this project we're going to make a silver leaf bead wrapped around our straw, and we're going to be using PMC Plus. We've sent you a leaf skeleton here, which you can buy from the art shops and card making suppliers. And what we expect you to do is cut off the top third where the stem is, so you're left with a leaf this sort of size. We're going to roll out our silver clay so that it's long enough and wide enough to fit our leaf on there, but not less than 3 cards thick. And we need to remember to oil the backing surface, and in fact we're not going to see the inside of the backing texture, but I'm rolling out on here as a matter of habit and because I can move it around fairly easily. So I've got my PMC Plus, and we're going to go down to not less than 3 cards thick, and it needs to be long enough and wide enough to fit our leaf on there. Let's check how we're doing. It needs to be a little bit longer and a little bit wider. I'm going to go a bit wider. Now I can either pick up the clay or I can move my leather sideways, and I need to make sure my cards are right on top there. So I've gone a bit wider. And now I just need to be a little bit longer, and we're down to 3 cards, which is where we want to be. I wouldn't normally go as thin as 3 cards, but because it's going to be wrapped up, it's going to be nice and strong. So there we have a piece that's long enough and wide enough for our leaf skeleton. And you want to choose the side of the leaf that has a deep texture, a deep ridge down the middle here, and put that in contact with the silver clay. And keeping your cards close in, we're going to roll the leaf into the silver clay, nice and firm. Then we're going to cut off the excess clay, and I'm just using a toothpick. There's no need to use a sharp blade here because you'd be cutting into your backing leather if you were using a sharp blade to remove your excess. I'm going to wrap up my excess here so it's not drying out. Now, if I can, I'm going to remove my leaf from the end here, and I can use it again in the future. And now I'm going to get my clay onto my straw, which I've oiled already. So I need to be able to remove my clay from the leather and get it onto the straw. Begin to roll it up with very gentle pressure so I'm not distorting the texture from the leaf. Now I'm going to add a small amount of water to the tip here to help glue the whole thing together. And I'm not going to spray water directly onto the piece. I'm going to spray it onto my mat and use a brush to just bring in some moisture to the end here, and this will help to seal it all together. So now my piece is ready to be put aside and dried, and we need to allow the outside to dry thoroughly. And then we're going to remove the whole piece so that the air can get to the inside where the straw is in contact. Now I don't really want to leave it resting down on a hard surface like this, because I'd end up with a flat area on my bead. So instead I'm going to use a tip I learned from the fabulous Sealy Fago, and use some foam, some fairly soft foam, and allow it to dry on that. And that will just